Good afternoon, esteemed committee members. My name is Christopher, and I'm joined here today by my colleagues Raquel, Edward, and Wendy to present to you our Canada National Security Strategy. Next slide, please. From the post-war period until very recently, Canada has relied heavily on the United States to uphold its national security. Geographically protected and bordered to the south by a friendly global superpower, Canada has been shielded from many security threats. While this American security umbrella has allowed Canada to redirect spending from its military and other security agencies toward economic and domestic priorities, it has also fostered a complacent approach to national security. Although concerns about Canada's lack of security preparedness have long existed, they gained renewed urgency amid recent shifts in the international order, particularly following the election of American President Donald Trump to a second term. The increasing unpredictability of U.S. foreign policy and evolving alliance dynamics have underscored the risks of over-reliance on a single partner, highlighting the need for Canada to strengthen its own security capabilities and strategic autonomy. As the Prime Minister outlined at Davos, Canada can no longer naively assume that it can continue to benefit from the rules-based order that has characterized the last half-century. If Canada fails to strengthen its own security capabilities, it risks being strategically vulnerable and ill-prepared for emerging threats. In light of these circumstances, it is clear that Canada is in need of an updated, overarching national security strategy. Next slide, please. For the last 20 years, secure and an open society has been the foundational policy guiding Canadian security decision-making. Released in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, it was a policy built primarily in consideration of the threat posed by non-state actors and setting out a clear and principled framework, protecting Canadians at home and abroad, preventing Canada from being used as a base for threats to our allies, and contributing to international security. In the years since, that framework has been supplemented, not replaced, by topic-specific strategies, including cybersecurity, counterterrorism, and critical infrastructure protection, all of which continue to rest on securing an open society as their foundation. These supplemental strategies are not misguided. On the contrary, many of them remain sound and effectively address modern challenges within their respective domains. The problem is that the foundational policy they rely upon is no longer fit for purpose. Today, we are in need of a whole of society approach that reflects the world as it is, not as it was. This means a security strategy that is able to account for the state-based nature of modern threats, fundamentally rooted in the use of non-traditional avenues to exert state-to-state coercion. Updating the foundational policy is a strategic necessity if Canada is to safeguard its sovereignty, reliance, and prosperity in an era defined once again by power politics. Next slide, please. With that said, we present to you Resolve Abroad, Resilience at Home, a revised, all-encompassing security strategy focusing on three primary areas: great power rivalry, economic security, and Arctic security. We have prioritized these areas because they have been the most directly affected by recent shifts in the international order and are the most absent from existing security policy. They therefore present the most pressing challenges to Canada's national security. This strategy emphasizes building strong and pragmatic security partnerships while also taking measures to build Canada's security capacity in order for it to be more self-sufficient. Some may argue that it is overly reactionary to adopt a new security strategy in this changing geopolitical landscape, and that things may return to the way they were before. To be clear, while recent shifts in the international order have exposed the inadequacies of Canada's security policy, they are by no means the cause of them. Our proposed strategy is thus not only a response to the changing landscape, but a long-term vision for the future. This strategy echoes many of the principles and messaging put forward by the Prime Minister at his speech at Davos. In the past, Canada has sometimes been criticized for not following through on its commitments. The unveiling of our strategy is thus an opportunity to show the world that Canada is serious in its promises made at Davos and to follow up bold assertions with meaningful actions. And with that said, I will now pass the floor on to Edward to go over the specific security priorities of our strategy.
Thank you, Christopher. Slide, please. When we talk about national security, it's tempting to think in terms of threats we can see, like a missile, a cyber attack, a violation of airspace. But the most consequential shift in Canada's security environment is not any single one threat, Rather, it is the end of the rules-based order and the return to power politics. This means great powers using their strength, scale, and influence to reshape the world as they see fit, effectively breaking international norms in favor of a might makes right for the modern age. In short, this is why we as a country are faced with a generational security challenge. As the last several years have proven, Canada is not immune from this. In fact, we are already in the middle of this, navigating a coercive convergence where vision states like Russia, China, as well as an increasingly unilateral and transactional United States employ non-traditional levers such as tariffs and export controls, among other gray zone strategies, to undermine national sovereignty for the express purpose of extracting concessions and compliance. To address this cornerstone challenge, Canada, a middle power in this era of decaying international norms, cannot compete with the United States and China or on scale, must then compete through collectivity, credibility, and sustained engagement. Slide, please. It is in this context that we are faced with three core challenges, all inextricably linked to Canada's effort to resist great power coercion in the midst of the global breakdown. First is the rise of great power rivalry and the deployment of power politics to the detriments of multilateralism. The second is Canada's increased vulnerability in the realm of economic security as states increasingly deploy economic and trade policy as tools of geopolitical statecraft. And third is the very real and material threat that these wider dynamics have presented for Arctic security, more specifically Canadian sovereignty in the High North and the Northwest Passage. Slide, please. In great power rivalry, the ensuring abandonment of multilateralism weakens the ability for middle powers like Canada to effectively push back against this coercive coercion. And unless our foundational security policy reflects that reality, all other efforts rest on an unstable foundation. Our proposal then is that Canada pursue a variable geometry, a strategy of middle power collectivity built on limited goal partnerships to achieve effective progress on areas that alignment and mutual beneficial outcomes, while creating a framework of cooperation to better resist diplomatic coercion from great powers. And to achieve this, a generational investment in Global Affairs Canada to reach the diplomatic capacity needed to meet the challenges of our time. This cannot be a top-down approach and must operate both within international institutions and through a sustained physical diplomatic presence. First, Canada must move beyond a culture of diplomatic penny pinching. We've thinned our global presence and underinvested in regional expertise while consistently failing to match the diplomatic engagement of partner nations. If Canada wants influence, it must determine specific national interests clearly and pursue it consistently. This requires a sustained diplomatic postings, cultural competency, and subject matter specialization, not a revolving door of generalism. Second, Canada must deepen relationships beyond traditional or trendy partners. Programs like the Canada Asian Scholars Exchange, the Canada Asian Seed, and the Emerging Leaders in Americas program, and similar knowledge partnerships may not generate immediate returns, but they build access, trust, and long-term leverage. Influence is built before it's needed. Third, Canada must more strategically leverage its diverse institutional positions. Whether in the African Development Bank or the Organization of American States, membership in both the Commonwealth and La Francophonie, or even our partnership in the European Space Agency, to coordinate with other middle powers around specific limited objectives. The pursuit of this strategy may create tension with domestic interests, but foreign policy cannot be subordinated to short-term market pressures or passing social fads. In a multipolar world, Canada's leverage will not come from scale. It will come from sustained relationships, institutional positioning, and disciplined coalition building. Ottawa's attitude on diplomatic engagement must change and acknowledge that to have the world respond, we must first reach out to let them know we are here. If we want influence, we must invest in a diplomatic architecture that makes influence possible. Now passing the floor to Raquel to address economic security and Arctic security at length.
Next slide, please. Thank you so much, Edward. Canada's export economy is heavily concentrated with 77% of exports going to the United States. This increases risks of coercion from US policies seeking to protect domestic markets. Diversification is therefore essential to Canada's economic resilience. We propose a strategic trade diversification framework to expand interdependence and have a balanced set of trade relationships that strengthen Canada's bargaining power and limit over-concentration. The government should increase non-United States exports by 10% within 4 years and redirect trade promotion toward underdeveloped markets. A formal risk tiering system would set exposure thresholds in a strategic sector such as critical minerals and defense, enabling targeted tools like supply chain incentives when dependence becomes too high. Canada should better leverage existing agreements. Under the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement to Trans-Pacific Partnership, deeper engagement with Vietnam supports integration into Indo-Pacific supply chains, and expanding ties with Europe and Latin America further broaden Canada's export base. India represents another key opportunity. While trade remains limited, cooperation in Indigenous services, advanced manufacturing inputs, and talent exchange could expand without requiring full political alignment. Even modest growth in liquefied natural gas exports, which are currently under 1% to India, could help rebalance energy trades. India's defense sector also offers opportunities for regulated co-production and dual-use partnership. This aligns with Canada's defense industrial strategy within the build, partner, buy approach. Services are another major opportunity. With over $230 billion in exports, expanding digital trade agreements and labor mobility pathways would help Canadian firms grow globally while reducing barriers. These tools support diversification without creating new dependencies. This framework would be led by Global Affairs Canada, supported by Export Development Canada, Innovation, Science, and Economic Development, and the Department of Finance. A more diversified export base also strengthens Canada's position in future CUSMA negotiations by reducing vulnerability to United States pressures. By spreading exposure across sectors and aligning trade policy with economic security, Canada can build a more resilient economy. The goal here is to retain leverage, engage widely, and concentrate nowhere. Next slide, please. Moving on to Arctic security. Canada's Arctic faces ongoing sovereignty and security challenges due to its vast geography, high costs, and limited infrastructure. The region-only deep water port in Churchill cannot sustain reliable services and federal operations on its own. We propose investing in dual-use infrastructure that supports both civilian need and military readiness, strengthening long-term presence while improving services for northern communities. A key priority is improving maritime domain awareness, expanding satellite and radar networks, improving vessel tracking, and centralizing data would support commercial, environmental, and defense needs, while strengthening Arctic surveillance and North American aerospace defense command modernization. Canada also lacks reliable logistics. Many Arctic ports, airfields, and transportation routes cannot support both community needs and military operations at the same time. Developing multi-use hubs, fuel storage, and supply pre-positioning would improve services and coordination. Current plans to expand the Port of Churchill and northern transportation corridors are important, but remain focused on trade. We propose integrating surveillance system, logistics, capacity, and emergency response functions to support sustained operations. In this model, Churchill serves as a southern logistics anchor, complemented by northern capacity in Cambridge Bay and infrastructure near Mary River Mine, creating a layered system of sustainment and oversight. The proposed Grey Bay Road would further strengthen inland connectivity. These efforts must align with Canada's Arctic governance priorities. With more than half of Arctic residents being Indigenous and Canada's commitment to the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Indigenous partnership must be embedded in infrastructure design and delivery. Implementation would be led by Transport Canada, the Department of National Defence, and Crown Indigenous Relations, in partnership with territorial and Indigenous governments. Together, this dual-use infrastructure strategy strengthens Canada's Arctic presence while improving community resilience and long-term security outcomes. I will now pass the mic to Wendy. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Raquel. My colleagues have walked you through the threat landscape and the case for why Canada must act. What I want to do now is answer the harder question, how we actually get this done. Let us start with the implementation timeline. We believe that strong environmental, social, and governance practices mitigate risks, open doors to new opportunities, drive innovation, attract top talent, and strengthen the social and economic fabric of our communities. Recognizing the delicate nature of setting up a new standard of industry practices and profitability, we recommend a rigorous evaluation method that will provide a continuous feedback loop where learning informs future decisions on design instrument selection, and implementation. Moreover, the PM's point about Canada's public service being not ready for this is exactly the problem we see a Centre of Excellence solving. We view the COE needing to sit somewhere with cross-departmental authority and proximity to cabinet decision-making, which is why we'd argue for it to be headed by the Privy Council, as it seems like the right home for policy coordination. With a specific explanation, the COE isn't a communications or departmental function, it is a policy design and implementation support function that serves finance, ESDC, public safety, and Industry Canada simultaneously without making them seem inferior. The ESG standard itself serves as both a fiscal tool and an implementation instrument. A well-designed ESG security standard does not merely incur costs, it creates fiscal capacity through multiple mechanisms that significantly reduces the government's net exposure. For example, sovereign bonds. Like Canada's first green bond in 2022, which raised $5 billion, with the formal ESG security standard as the policy backbone, Canada can credibly issue a broader security and sustainability sovereign bond program, attracting institutional investors who are mandated to hold ESG-related assets. This is real money, not theoretical. We're broadening an existing program. Slide, please. Our total 4-year investment is approximately $16.4 billion, an average of just over $4 billion per year for 4 years, roughly 0.5% of projected GDP. It is real money, but it is not extraordinary money given what we are asking the government to do. Spending is intentionally structured to increase gradually over time. We are not requesting Parliament to approve the full $16 billion upfront. Instead, spending will rise as institutional capacity develops and procurement progresses, peaking particularly when significant archetype procurement and ESG enforcements are fully operational. Where we are the most confident in our 16.4 budget calculation resides in Canada's allied cost-sharing and NATO envelope. Canada has committed to investing 3.5% of GDP in core military needs by 2035. However, the pledge also includes an additional 1.5% of GDP for, and I want to quote this precisely, defense and security-related investment made by all levels of Canadian government, such as telecommunications and emergency preparedness systems which serve national defense and national security purposes, end quote. And the commitment explicitly states that currently planned spending by federal, provincial, and territorial and municipal governments will count towards that 1.5% target. We suggest framing the development of northern infrastructures as contribution to Canada's allied defense commitments. We have modeled the federal, provincial, territorial contribution at $2 billion over 4 years, achievable given existing provincial capital plans in the territories. Regarding the fiscal constraints, the minority parliament poses the most significant risk. The outright early spending of $1.6 billion can be executed using appropriation authorities. The hardest conversation inside the government will have to do with relocating different government department funds, approximately $3 billion. We recommend the clerk convene a deputy ministers committee on security relocations in the early phases to negotiate those trade-offs before the budget cycles, not during it. Slide, please. Finally, the communication strategy. In a minority parliament, public mandate is essential. It is a function for everything else we have discussed. Evidently, communication is a critical part of this implementation strategy, since we have to inform Canadians of a suite of policies that affect multiple fields and will bring economic prosperity to them and their families, and hopefully alleviate any feelings of unrest related to our relationships with our neighbors, specifically those to the south. At the Canadian level, all involved departments must reassure the public that Ottawa's position is that Canada is not a vassal state. We assert our Arctic, our territory, and our rights. Public Safety Canada is our recommended message house. Security is the through line of this strategy, and the Minister of Public Safety has the clearest mandate to address these concerns. We recommend finance leads the economic frame when needed. ESDC leads on workers. GAC serves as the international lead, which is the right institutional home given GAC's mandate and its relationship with Five Eyes, NATO, and our G7 partners. This communication strategy is not just about public opinion, it is about harmonizing the efforts of this proposal at the government level. We are now ready to move on to questions. Thank you.
We are very thankful for you to have presented this to us. Obviously, a lot of work went into it, and it's very obvious that there's a lot of collaboration in this group. So very, very thankful. I'm slightly jealous because I was in UBC earlier this week, and there are people golfing right outside of there. So I felt bad as we're sitting here at minus 17 billion and snow. So we were not jealous. I'm going to ask my colleague, Violetta, to start the questions. Her expertise is around strategy and operations. So over to you, Violetta.
Yes, sure. Good afternoon, Team UBC. Thank you for your presentation. Appreciate it. You brought us a lot of good insights here. From an operational perspective, there is always, when there is a strategy that has been developed, there's a tension between balancing and strengthening capabilities over time, right? And while being prepared to respond immediately. So how does your strategy balance between these competing demands?
I can take that question. The policy itself is built on the idea, as Monique has spoken, the over time investment. But ultimately, it is also rooted on immediate action of setting the direction. By adopting this policy, by having this policy announced, you send that clear, immediate message of immediate action now. The funding, of course, will take time and must take appropriations as well as other negotiations. But what we can do with this policy is send a clear message of action, solidity, and offering a concrete example of the commitments that our Prime Minister has made at Davos.
Very good. And if I can just ask you a follow-up question. In terms of the priorities for implementation, so thinking of, okay, I heard you say funding, but what would you say would be that one action that would move the yardstick really quickly when you think about your roadmap in this strategy and the various initiatives that need to happen?
It's our position that the investments in Global Affairs Canada are the most visible and the most cohesive with immediate impact.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Violetta. My colleague Vincent, with lots of expertise in international and interprovincial issues, and I'm going to pass it over to you, Vincent.
Apologies, I was muted. Thanks very much. Really enjoyed that presentation. I wanted to focus on policy proposal number 1. And I thought it was great that you brought out the great power rivalry, and indeed, at the beginning, you set out this big strategic reset in terms of competition between great powers in the world, and this was the driving force. What was interesting, though, that your policy proposal is an investment in diplomatic capacity, whereas when we're talking about great power rivalry, there's been talk in recent years of the possibility of a regional war. We've seen Russia, Ukraine. We've seen a more aggressive China with Taiwan, other parts of that region, and even the United States, in the Middle East right now, etc. So this prospect of a conflict breaking out is with us now. So I found it. I'd be kind of curious if you thought about the military side to this. You focused on the diplomatic capacity, and don't get me wrong, I have no problem with giving greater capacity to Global Affairs Canada. I used to work there. But why diplomatic capacity versus what's needed right now for the Canadian Armed Forces in terms of expeditionary capability, being able to operate overseas, and potentially, God forbid, but potentially getting involved in a regional war within that context of great power rivalry?
We see this policy largely complementary to the 3% GDP commitment by the Prime Minister on military affairs. So our concern with this strategy was ensuring that there was a diplomatic capacity to create that soft power to match that.
Okay.
Is there a follow-up question at all?
No, I'm good. Thank you very much.
Okay, we've got lots of time. I'm going to take a question eventually. Christina, my colleague Christina has lots of expertise in communications and engaging the public. I'm going to pass the next question over to her.
Thank you very much. So I am curious, mainly on stakeholder engagement. So how, in your proposal, did you assess different stakeholders' interest in what you were recommending? How would you go about positioning the government for some of those interests and engaging them, the stakeholders, moving forward?
I can take that one if you guys are cool with that. the biggest stakeholder that we identified was the Canadian public, as this is going to be coming out of taxpayer dollars, and the sort of like the big sort of messaging is trying to convince why the strategy is necessary, why now. And I think sort of gearing it around towards like an emphasis on the protection of Canadian sovereignty would be like the most clear forming of messaging, because in the past we've seen that concerns of sovereignty are very much like a force of unification amongst Canada. We saw last year with the threats of the 51st state and even the Canada versus U.S. hockey face-off. We just saw like a very like large sense of unity. So just really playing into that the emphasis on the protection of Canadian sovereignty um, would sort of justify why we're asking for these, like why the taxpayer money would be going to this, and again framing it in sort of a protection of sovereignty would be a way of getting those stakeholders on board.
Thank you. In the past, the perception of GAC or how can I say, foreign service is that they were sort of a bit bad cats. I'm thinking back to the Harper days. How would you counter that specific perception or narrative, given that you're really expanding the role of the Foreign Public Service, GAC, the importance of trade, etc.?
I can take this one if yes, thank you for your question, Christina. I think with our ESG mandate as well as public-facing communication strategies, we hope to reassure Canadians that we are not just building up our military forces with materialist initiatives. We are building their economies. We are building their communities. There are many ways to protect Canada, and that is to ensure that it is strong enough to withstand any sort of unbalanced relationships in the future that might come across. So even if we are recommending GAC head the international leads, we still, our priority is still at the homebound with Canadians here and abroad, and hopefully that they will be able to see the contributions that GAC and other departments have made, not just in some faraway land, but also in their communities.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll ask the last question. You have quite a detailed proposal in number 3, and we've asked about number 1. Just asked about number 1. Stronger positions in CUSMA, CETA, and the CPTPP. What are the specific actions? What are the specific policy instruments what are you proposing in this area?
Hi,
Could
I
you
can
repeat the
take that
question?
one. Please repeat the question. Thank you.
Oh, it seems your number 2 seems very general. I understand that we want to diversify, but what are the specific policy actions and instruments what are you proposing to enable Canada's greater diversification?
So I briefly mentioned the risk tiering system, and we are proposing that based off of the CETA, so focusing on Europe, the CUSMA, focusing on Mexico and the US, and then the CTPP on the Indo-Pacific, that currently most of 77% is going to the US, whereas like 5% of exports are going everywhere else. So we want to increase that export, and using policies such as looking at commercial services or travel services. Those are one ways of increasing some diversification. In addition to, if we're focusing on LNG transportation to India, as I briefly mentioned, we can increase manufacturing in Vietnam. And then additional policies would look at.
I mean, I don't think my question was clear. I understand what you want to achieve, but how will you achieve it through a government action?
We would achieve it through the build partner buy model, which is a Canada Defense industrial strategy, working with these countries, being able to decide whether we can build the infrastructure at home. If not, then we can partner with some of the allies across the board. And then if not, we can buy from them as well to diversify our imports and not just exports.
Great, thanks so much.